Hello my dear friends, welcome back to another Star Wars video. So today we're going to be talking about a big Jedi topic. We have some brand new reveals, which really changed the prequel trilogy. Did you know the aftermath of Jedi Master Yaddle's death is actually made worse by events earlier in the timeline in the Acolyte? Star Wars fans have been talking a lot about the Acolyte in the last 24 hours, because the Parrot Analytics data which I recently covered have been making the rounds. The show has seen a resurgence in popularity out of the blue. Go and check out my video on that if you haven't, but today we're going to be talking about the final episode, and something which has been really bugging me since, and it's just gotten so much worse. Leslie Headland promised the series was not going to be kind to the Jedi, and it turns out they were involved in a big cover-up. What made it worse is that in the final scene, we got the cameo of Master Yoda. Vernestra Rwoh lied to the Republic. She framed Sol for what happened on Brendok and concealed the identity of Qimir, her former Padawan, to make sure the Jedi Order did not receive scrutiny, and further avoided investigation. However, she then went to Master Yoda, and we assume she reveals the truth. And this makes the Phantom Menace and everything that follows it so much worse, because Yoda knew about the existence of the Sith, which means turning a blind eye to so many subsequent events that were caused by the Sith is kind of his fault. But here's the thing, before the season ends, Vernestra asked May, who has now been brainwashed, to help Vernestra identify her former Padawan, Qimir, the man that May keeps seeing in her mind. So I guess the plan was, Vernestra and Yoda secretly go and kill Qimir, and everyone is none the wiser. Problem averted. But the problem is, by the time of episode 1, Yoda knows about the Sith rule of 2. They should have been more careful and should have followed more breadcrumbs. And the fact Yoda knew about all of this makes how the Jedi reacted to other deaths later in the timeline so much worse. And today I want to focus on new information about the aftermath of Jedi Master Yaddle's death. Lucasfilm just made the Jedi Order look so much worse than it was. In the last couple of years, if you're talking about Tales of the Jedi, the Yoda comics, a couple of novels and now the Jedi Knights comics, Star Wars has given us new insights into the reasons the Jedi Order fell, their hubris, their arrogance, and other reasons which originate long before Order 66. And I'm not just talking about the Shroud of the Dark Side. We need to go beyond the manipulations of Palpatine. The Guardians of Peace and Justice didn't only fail in stopping the rise of Darth Sidious, but also in keeping their core responsibilities to their own members. We often like to talk about how the Jedi failed Count Dooku, Qui-Gon, Anakin, but a tragic example that just got worse is Master Yaddle. As you know, one of my favourite Jedi. Her death in Tales of the Jedi was tragic, at the hands of Count Dooku. She resigned her position on the Jedi Council before confronting him and learning the truth that he was Darth Tyrannus. What made this confrontation even sadder is that to an extent, Yaddle saw his point of view. Her death in Legends was very different. She sacrificed herself on a mission to Mawan. But ever since Disney gave us a new updated canon death, there's been something really bugging me. How the Jedi reacted to her death, why there wasn't an in-depth investigation. Moreover, how Yoda didn't learn the truth about Yaddle's death until long after the Empire had taken over, during his exile on Dagobah. In the recent Yoda comics, Yoda goes to the dark side cave on Dagobah, preparing himself for Luke Skywalker's arrival. In a moment of introspection, Yoda blames himself for the fall of the Jedi, and the Force shows him that it was Count Dooku who murdered Yaddle. Yoda is distraught, but I find it absolutely horrendous and unacceptable it took him this long to learn the truth. Because now we're wondering, why wasn't there a Jedi investigation following her death? Well, my dear friends, we now have a very tragic canon explanation. Just before facing Count Dooku in the works on Coruscant, Yaddle made public her resignation from the Jedi Council, and because they described her departure as, quote, peaceful, they had no expectation that she was going to return, and no one suspected something bad was going to happen. Maybe she told the Jedi Council she was going to go into exile. But here's the problem, my dear friends. Surely Yoda and the others would have felt her death in the Force, the same way Yoda later senses the Order 66 victims. Also, being one of only 3 Yoda species around during that time, she would have been someone important to Yoda nonetheless. So it does raise a lot of questions. Maybe one day they'll answer it in a book or a comic. Maybe there was an investigation following her death, and maybe that person also died at the hands of Dooku and never lived to report back. It's just not a good look that the Jedi didn't follow the breadcrumbs. She died in the same year as Sifo Dyas. And in the same window of time, Qui-Gon Jinn was killed by Darth Maul, Dooku left the Order, the Clone Army project was hijacked by the Sith, and all of this highlights how blind the Jedi really were. The Jedi Order had become an institution obsessed with control, structure, and tradition. Anyone who acted outside of their narrow view of the Force was maligned, seen as misguided, or even dangerous. And I did mention this the other day, the brand new Jedi Knights comic shows that even Obi-Wan had visions of the future, and Yoda ignored them, saying some of them will come true and some of them won't. At every step, they turned a blind eye, and it just really baffles me. It took decades for Yoda to find out about Yaddle's death. One of the most overlooked factors at play was fear of chaos. I think for Yoda and Mace Windu, if they looked too closely at the sequence of events, the Sifo Dyas situation, why Yaddle left, why Dooku left, they might have had to confront real fear. Fear they were losing control, fear the Sith might be back. Even though Yoda knew about the Sith, since Qimir thanks to what Vernestra tells him, or we assume, fear that their rigid, ancient ways were no longer working. Yes, their minds were clouded by Palpatine, but rather than face uncertainty, they doubled down on dogma, inaction disguised as wisdom. By this point, like I said, Darth Sidious was already working within the Senate, manipulating the Jedi's reality. And something which Yaddle saw, something which Qui-Gon acknowledged, is that by the time of the prequel trilogy, the Jedi had become too entangled by Republic politics. Instead of being spiritual seekers and peacekeepers, they operated more as an elite, diplomatic agency. If something wasn't officially documented or didn't fit their procedural worldview, it was simply brushed aside. Yaddle stepped down peacefully, no investigation, no follow-up. We don't know the ins and outs, we don't know if there were arguments or how that discussion went down, but for whatever reason, the Jedi Council was satisfied. And after she walked away, she was murdered. And I guess the Council never found out why. Their mindset blinded them. In the book Dooku Jedi Lost, Dooku pins all the blame on Yoda himself, how centuries in power as Grand Master has blinded him, and the context provided in the Acolyte makes it so much worse. The reason I keep harping on about Yaddle is that she represents a side of the Jedi that was needed during that time. She represented the compassionate side of the Jedi Order. She would never act or even speak without first meditating and asking the Force to guide her. And what she observed following Qui-Gon's death was an increasing detachment from the core values she once associated with the Jedi. She wasn't falling to the dark side, her allegiance was still to the light, but she could no longer sit in silence at the top while the Council continued to ignore mounting problems. That made her one of the few Jedi with clarity, and what's even more devastating is she didn't step down out of bitterness. She was still following the Force, but when she noticed Dooku's behavior changing, she was curious and followed him not as his enemy, but as someone with humanity, reaching out. Stepping down wasn't abandonment, it was a protest, a moral choice. Her leaving and then being killed with no successful investigation highlights the flaws of the Jedi Council. If you question the system, you're quietly erased. No fallout, just silence. And yet, she was one of the few who saw the danger the Jedi were walking into, but she couldn't be complicit. She had doubts, and the Council didn't allow doubts. When you look at Tales of the Jedi, the reason it was genius, especially the Dooku episodes, is because despite being a Sith, despite him doing some horrific things, you can understand his rationale for leaving the Order. In the second Dooku episode, they explore his relationship with Mace Windu as the two investigate the death of a member of the Jedi Council. It turns out the guards hired to protect the Jedi had instead killed her, as they viewed her as a puppet of the Senate that had betrayed and stopped serving them. Mace, who stuck to the original mission and didn't investigate, is granted a seat on the Jedi Council for his efforts, while Dooku is not. And then the next episode shows Dooku's final straw. His warnings of the coming darkness are ignored, leading to Qui-Gon's death. And the show makes it evident covering up a threat was a purely political move from the Jedi, in the name of not causing alarm, just like in the Acolyte, which proved Grand Master Yoda had been employing the same approach long before the Skywalker saga began.